This is the worst thing that ever happened at a concert. In 2003, the band Great White was performing live when pyrotechnics went off as planned. But within moments, everything took a horrifying turn. Flames erupted as the foam on the stage and walls caught fire, spreading faster than anyone could react. While the band managed to escape through the back exits, hundreds of audience members were left in chaos, desperately trying to find their way out. Thick smoke quickly filled the venue and people scrambled toward the front entrance, creating a wall of bodies as they clambered over each other in a desperate bid to survive. In the video of the incident, you can see people screaming and getting crushed to death. The situation spiraled as people became trapped, some crushed under the weight of others, and survivors described the scenes of half-burned victims being pulled out from the flames. Outside in the snow, survivors tried to help by rubbing snow onto the burned. But the devastation was immense. By the end, 100 people had tragically lost their lives, and over 200 were injured in one of the most heartbreaking concert disasters in history.
The whole conspiracy, murdered in Disney or like injured in Disney, and like they basically cover up any deaths or any accidents that happened back in like the 70s, right?
Yeah.
There was this girl, her name was Debbie Stone. She had just recently got into college, but college is expensive, obviously, so she landed a job at America Sings, which is one of the new attractions to Disneyland.
Would you have a list? Because I've never heard of that.
So it was this right here.
Oh, okay.
And basically it was an attraction that paid tribute to, you know, the United States,
Okay.
kind of patriotic, but it wasn't just one set. It was a 6-set stage. It would rotate clockwise.
Okay.
But this one specific day, it was actually spinning counterclockwise. And she had started her evening shift. She was in charge of kind of saying goodbye to the people who had already watched the show. So she was on the left side of the stage. Everybody was enjoying the show. Out of nowhere, everybody hears like this horrific, scary ass scream. They go over to the left side of the stage and they see her in between the sets. She got crushed to death, bro.
Yankee Doodle liked the South, sang their song so dear, thought they were most elegant for everyone to hear. Yankee Doodle sing it up, the Yankee Doodle bang, with fine music and the working with the song behind.
That shit was so fucking crazy, and we all know like the whole conspiracy with the multiple people who got injured during ride. They always say like that the death is outside of Disney, like they
Imagine accidentally picking up a decapitated head thinking it was a Halloween prop. This is what happened this Halloween in Edinburgh. Just after 8 p.m. on the 2nd of November, emergency services raced to Cowgate in Edinburgh after members of the public rang police. A male pedestrian had been reportedly hit by a car, and at first people in the area spotted a severed human head and approached it and picked it up, believing it to be a Halloween decoration. Now, it was obviously Halloween just this Thursday, and so you'd be forgiven for thinking that maybe something like this was part of a costume or maybe a decoration from a Halloween event. A horrific video is now going round on social media, which I just can't believe that people film and post this sort of stuff online, but essentially an individual picks up the head, but immediately upon realising that it is actually real, puts it back down. Blair Street, Guthrie Street and Candlemaker Road were all cordoned off by police. A serious incident was declared and many local bars and nightclubs were closed and Halloween events were shut down. An investigation is ongoing, obviously, into this horrific incident to try to ascertain what happened to this victim and also the people that are posting these horrible videos online.
Now you acting like me, acting like we wasn't more than.
The TikToker I just showed you in that video, known as Ali Spice, was killed in a head-on car crash in 2022. On December 11th, 2022, Ali and a few of her friends were driving in an Infiniti Q50. While they were driving down the road, though, a random man started driving towards them on the wrong side of the road. This man was 55-year-old Thomas Petrie. Thomas was going the wrong way down the state road in his pickup truck when he collided head-on with the Infiniti Q50. Devin Perkins, the driver of the vehicle, survived, but Ali Spice, who had almost 1 million TikTok followers at the time of her death, and 2 of their friends all died. But instead of stopping, trying to tend to the wounded and helping the people out that he just crashed into, 55-year-old Thomas Petrie decided to drive away and leave the scene of an accident. Thomas had been scheduled to go on trial on September 23rd of this year, but he ended up pleading no contest to the charges. He hasn't been sentenced yet, but this could mean a life sentence in prison for him. In fact, the state sentencing guidelines recommend a minimum of 36 years. And like I said many times on this TikTok, he's 55. So that would mean that he really wouldn't be out of prison even with the minimum until he was in his 90s. After Ali died, there were tons of tributes that flowed out, and it was a reminder that things like this are so unpredictable, so random, they can happen at any time. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Search for these two missing girls on Monday ended with finding 7 bodies on a remote Oklahoma property. This is what we know so far. These are the 7 people who were found shot to death on the Henrietta property. The property was rented by 39-year-old Jesse McFadden, who was a convicted sex offender. He lived there with his wife Holly and her 3 teenage kids, Riley, Michael, and Tiffany. Jesse reportedly hid his criminal history from his family and friends until recent months, and he was described as standoffish and extremely controlling, keeping his family under lock and key. He was on the Oklahoma State Sex Offender Registry after being convicted of first-degree rape back in 2003. He was released from prison in late 2020, which I honestly can't believe because while he was serving that sentence, he was using a contraband cell phone to send nude photos and videos of himself to a 16-year-old girl. But nonetheless, he was released anyway. Over the weekend, 2 of Tiffany's best friends, 14-year-old Ivy Webster and 16-year-old Brittany Brewer, were over at the family's home having a slumber party, which was pretty regular for them. An Amber Alert was issued when they didn't return home late Sunday evening. The following day, Jesse had a scheduled court hearing for charges of soliciting sexual conduct with a minor and for possession of CSAM, which he failed to show up to. Subsequently, a warrant was issued for his arrest, and when executing a search warrant, authorities found the bodies of all 7 people on the property, including Jesse himself. According to authorities, the bodies were not found in the residence, but in separate locations on the property. They were all shot between 1 and 3 times in the head and appeared to be running away from Jesse, who shot and killed all of them before turning the gun on himself. Not many details have been released, including what the motive may have been, but this was a completely shocking and senseless tragedy. It makes me wonder why Jesse was ever let out of prison in the first place. I've attached the GoFundMes for Ivy and Brittany's families in my bio if you'd like to help them during this difficult time.
White House GIF. I don't know if you ever heard about this.
I never heard about the White House GIF, but I heard about like GIFs, GIFs, whatever.
Yeah. And I got this from a YouTuber. He's the one that first talked about it, so I want to give him his credits. Lazy Masquerade. It's very, very eerie and disturbing once you know like the backstory to everything. We already know how those scary videos, crash videos were really popular back in the day. They would pop up. We would send them to people. This one wasn't as popular, but it was mostly associated with a video called Why You Never Became a Dancer.
So that's just the whole video?
A song by a band called White House. The song or whatever had nothing to do with the image it was showing, and the identity of the woman remained unknown for like a really long time. So it wasn't until June of last year that they found out who she really was, and a lot of people thought it was fake until a Reddit user, his name was Lane Campbell 77, ended up posting on his Reddit thread that he found a book that was about a Japanese serial killer. His name was Kiyoshi Akubo. He was one of Japan's most notorious serial killers. He had killed 8 victims, one of them being that girl. And her name was Reiko Takemura. One day he had picked her up, the same thing that he did to everybody else, asked her if she wanted to be a model so he could paint. When in this car, Kiyoshi got the impression that Reiko, she liked him. Kiyoshi tried to say that, let's go back to like a motel. Reiko was saying, do you really think I'm that type of girl? Later on, they ended up going through this forest road, and he tried to force himself onto her. She obviously slapped him. She tried to run away. He caught up to her. He strangled her to death. The only reason he was caught was because of Reiko's brother. He made it his mission to find Kiyoshi. It was just one night where
6 teenage boys played a harmless ding-dong ditch prank on this man's home, and just minutes later, 3 of them were dead. On the evening of January 19th, 2020, 6 teenage boys and best friends were having a sleepover and celebrating Jacob Avosku's 16th birthday. Later that night, one of the boys was dared to either jump into a pool or ding-dong ditch somebody's house, and after choosing the latter, they all got into a Prius driven by their 18-year-old friend and picked a random house. The house they chose belonged to 45-year-old Anurag Chandra in Corona, California. Once there, one of the teens hopped out, rang the doorbell, mooned the camera, and then got back into the Prius where they quickly drove off. But this harmless prank angered Anurag so much that he got into his car and started chasing the teens. He was going 99 miles per hour in a 40 mile per hour zone, and when he caught up to the Prius, he intentionally rammed into the back and side of it. This caused it to go off the road, quickly slamming into a tree and utility pole. The crash immediately killed Drake Ruiz, Daniel Hawkins, and Jacob Avosku, all 16 years old. According to Anurag, he didn't stop after the crash and proceeded to go home after hitting the kids because he didn't think anyone was hurt. He was arrested at his home later that same night. The driver and 2 other 13-year-olds who were also in the car were injured but survived the crash. During the investigation, Anorak said that the prank angered him so much, but also said that he decided to chase after the teens because he was worried for his family's safety after being mooned. It was also revealed that in the 3 hours before the prank, Anorak consumed 12 beers and was highly intoxicated. Anorak has just been charged with 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder and has since pleaded not guilty. He's due back in court on July 14th and faces life in prison without parole. It's also worth noting that at the time of the killings, Anorak was already facing domestic violence and battery charges in an unrelated incident.
This girl is proof that a lot of rock stars are pedophiles. And this is extremely sad. So this is Lori Maddox. And as Wikipedia states, she's a former child model and a baby groupie of the 1970s. So when she was only 13 years old, Lori started frequenting clubs in West Hollywood like the Whiskey A Go-Go. And in June of 1972, when she was only 13 years old, Lori was, as she claims, kidnapped. Lori had been kidnapped by Led Zeppelin's tour manager, a man named Richard Cole. Lori was then brought to Led Zeppelin guitar player Jimmy Page's room and basically kept there. Basically, Jimmy, who was 28 years old at the time, told Lori that he said he'd have her, so it's time to have her. And that started off their relationship. Jimmy reportedly kept this secret because he knew that it was wrong. It was statutory rape. He was 28 years old and she was only 13. And he went to great lengths to make sure that nobody would see him and Lori out in public. This included keeping her in secluded rooms where no one could see the two together. But their relationship is extremely well documented, and yes, this makes Jimmy Page a pedophile. But Jimmy wasn't the only adult that Lori was involved with while she was a minor. According to Lori, she actually lost her virginity to David Bowie. Yes, once again while she was a teenager. And she also claimed to have slept with Mick Jagger when she was only 17. Now, the photos of Lori Maddox are extremely sad and disturbing, especially when you realize that all the men in these pictures are very old, 28, 30, 32. And in these photos, Lori is literally a teenage girl. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, and it really perplexes me as to why people don't talk about this more. Like, nowadays, there's a massive discussion, a reckoning of things that have happened in the past, and yet with a lot of these classic rockers who had established relationships with minors, many of them physical in nature, they seem to just get glossed over. Now, Lori Maddox in her adult years actually came out and said that she couldn't wish this fate on her daughter. Here's a quote from her. She said, "I don't think underage girls should sleep with guys. I wouldn't want this for anybody's daughter. My perspective is changing as I get older and more cynical." So who knows at the end of the day exactly what all happened to Lori Maddox and who did what with her. But this story is extremely sad and disturbing and really makes you wonder how many of these old classic rock people did stuff like this. And what stories and things that they've done will never come to light because they've been hidden so well. If you want to listen to more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
This man was eaten alive by bugs, and whatever you do, don't look up the pictures. The case I'm about to explain takes place in the United States on September 12, 2022. LaShawn Thompson was a 35-year-old man who lived in Georgia, and on July 12, 2022, LaShawn was arrested for a misdemeanor battery charge and he was held in a pretrial detention. Since he couldn't afford his bail, they then realized LaShawn was suffering from multiple mental health issues, so he was placed in the psychiatric wing of the Fulton County Jail. His family was not informed and had no idea he was being held in this place. During his stay at the prison, LaShawn's mental and physical health began to decline. This was reported by the staff, and the superiors in the prison got this information but did nothing at all to help LaShawn. On the 13th of September, the staff entered LaShawn's cell, and when they entered, they found LaShawn with his eyes opened, covered in bugs, and he was completely unresponsive. The first staff member who found him refused to do CPR on him, and this staff member would later say she was too freaked out to help in any way. Many other staff members would try to resuscitate him, but their efforts failed. LaShawn was pronounced dead shortly after this, and his body was in a terrible state. There has been images of LaShawn's face released after he died. I can't show the pictures for obvious reasons, but his family did want the public to see his face, along with the pictures of his cell. They wanted everybody to know the horrible conditions they kept him in. So if you want to see the image of LaShawn, you can easily find it. I do warn you though about the picture because it is very disturbing. You can see insects all over his face, in his nose, eyes, and even inside of his mouth. The autopsy report also says that his cell was in terrible condition. with insect infestation and other filthiness around him, as you can see in the photo. The report continues by saying his entire body was infested with a large number of small insects. LaShawn had thousands of bites all over his body, and he was covered in his own feces. The picture of LaShawn's cell looks so disgusting and dirty, you can assume it was abandoned. The correction officer who wrote up the report said that he raised concerns about the living conditions he was kept in, and also the decline of his physical and mental health over the 3-month period. These concerns were raised a number of times, but it appears none of the senior staff took any of these concerns seriously, nor did they seem to care about his well-being and left him to die slowly. The photos of LaShawn are some of the most disturbing and sickening ones I've ever seen. If you do decide to look at the pictures of his body, look closely at the defibrillator pads. You'll see bedbugs still swarming and trying to climb up on them. Additionally, the small white spots are lice. For 3 months, this poor guy LaShawn was covered head to toe with bugs, and it was so bad that not only did it cause anemia, but they also ended up burying inside of his skin. This is literally modern day scaphism. This case is absolutely awful, and I can't believe this happened to LaShawn. May he rest in peace.
If you're terrified of clowns, you might want to skip this case. This woman was murdered by a clown who knocked on her door, and you'll be shocked when you find out who was behind the disguise. It was the morning of the 26th of May 1990 in beautiful South Florida. 40-year-old Marlene Warren lived in a lovely 5-bedroom home with her son Joe and her husband Michael. Michael was Joe's stepdad and Joe was age 21. He was in a cast after recently breaking his leg, and he'd had a few friends stay over the night before. While Joe and his friends sat in the lounge, they saw out the window a clown approach their front door. The clown was holding flowers and balloons, so obviously they thought this was going to be a nice surprise. When she heard the knock, Marlene went and answered the front door and could never have predicted what happened next. The clown shot her in the face. In a panicked state, Joe rang police and explained what had happened, and the emergency services rushed to the scene. Horrifically though, there was absolutely no clues as to who had done this. Her husband Michael had been out of town. There was only one small clue, and that was a car spotted nearby at the time. Now, this was a convertible Chrysler LeBaron, and my brother is obsessed with cars, so he's going to be fuming if I pronounce that wrong. They tracked down this car and took some samples from inside. There was some orange synthetic hair inside. Now, remember this for later. Obviously, this was the 90s, so this was back when people simply went to fancy dress shops. They didn't order anything online. So the police knew that they had to go and ask shop owners in the nearby area if anyone had come in and bought a clown costume. And they were in luck. A woman had bought a full clown costume and wig from a nearby store just days prior to the murder. However, that didn't really give the police much evidence to go off. Police were initially suspicious of Marlene's husband, Michael. This was due to something that Marlene had said to Joe in the days prior to her death. She said that she felt her husband just didn't care anymore, and she told Joe that she wasn't really happy in the marriage. Also, Michael would have obviously benefited from her death financially. Then there was a bombshell. There were rumours that Michael had been having an affair with his business associate, Sheila Keene. Now, the pair obviously denied these rumours and said that there was no weight to them. The case went cold over the years, but interestingly, Michael and Sheila did end up in a relationship. This was despite Michael going to prison for 3 years for some serious offences. These were grand theft, racketeering and tampering with cars from his used car dealership, literally exactly the same as the dad from Matilda. Sheila stuck by him though, and the pair carried on together. They got married in Vegas in 2002, and interestingly, and I think suspiciously, Sheila changed her name to Debbie. Tragically, years and years went by with this case going colder and colder. That was until 2014 when new DNA technology became available. Forensic tests showed that orange fibres in the car matched those that had been found in Sheila's apartment. In September 2017, she was arrested. Now, despite Michael being adamant that she was not guilty, she actually did plead guilty and was given just 12 years in prison. She has now been released from prison and she maintains her innocence to this day.
Have you ever heard about a case about a 17-year-old boy? His name is Kendrick Johnson. No. On January 10th of 2013, he was doing his regular morning routine. He got ready for school. He took the school bus. The afternoon came. His mom was expecting him to come back. When the school bus came around, he didn't get off the bus. And it wasn't until midnight where the mom ends up calling the cops. They basically tell the mom that he's probably out with a girl, just doing teenager things. The next day, they go down to the school and a commotion starts happening in the gym. And that's when they discover his body. So his body was discovered in a big ass mat, like a wrestling mat, and they're heavy, bro. It's hard.
Take a lot of people.
Yes, bro. And this is where the weird stuff starts happening. So the medic team, right? They show up 5 hours later to the scene. They rule it as a freak accident. They say, oh, we could tell by the scene that there was no foul play involved, that he accidentally threw his shoe in there.
Bro,
and like,
get out of here.
Apparently that's something that the kids would do. They would throw their shoes inside the holes. They wouldn't climb inside. They would just tilt the mats over, get their shoes in the bottom.
Yeah, why would he like?
And footage that they found from the gym, because the gym had motion sensor cameras, 4 pointing at every angle of the gym, and the times that they needed when he disappeared,
They were deleted.
Of course they were.
when they went to the crime scene, they found a random shoe that appeared to have blood on it, and also a random hoodie, and there was blood on the wall. And the cops said that the blood was tested, but it wasn't Kendrick's blood, so we don't need it as evidence. They didn't take it as evidence. The family was not convinced at all, and hired a medical examiner to do a private autopsy. That medical examiner said that when they opened up his chest, that he had no organs in his body. It was replaced by...
This is the exact moment the 18-year-old Samantha Koenig was abducted from a coffee stand in Alaska. At around 8 p.m. on February 1st, 2012, Samantha was kidnapped from the Common Grounds coffee stand in Anchorage, Alaska by serial killer Israel Keys. She had been working alone when security footage showed her being approached by Israel, who walked up to the window, pointed a gun at her, and demanded that she turn off the lights. He then bound her hands together, jumped through the window, stuffed napkins into her mouth, and forced her into his truck before taking her back to his house where he lived with his girlfriend and 10-year-old daughter. Once at home, he tied her up in a shed in his backyard, went inside to make sure his family was asleep, and then went back out to the shed where he sexually assaulted and strangled Samantha to death. Israel then left her body in the shed and proceeded to go on a 2-week-long cruise with his family. Samantha was reported missing the next day, and the FBI quickly got involved, but unfortunately it was too late. When Israel returned home from the cruise, he decided to take a ransom photo of Samantha in order to receive money from her parents. He promised that she'd be unharmed if they sent him money. But in order to provide proof of life, he needed to make it look like she was still alive, so he proceeded to braid her hair and do her makeup, and he even went as far as sewing her eyelids open with fishing line. But in all reality, she had already been deceased for 2 weeks. On February 24th, Israel texted Samantha's boyfriend using her phone and told him to look for a package in a local park, and it was then that the Anchorage police found the ransom photo and the note demanding $30,000. And just wanting their daughter back safely, Samantha's parents paid him the money by depositing it into her bank account that was linked to her debit card, which he had stolen from her. Sadly, Samantha would not be returned to her family, as Israel then dismembered her body and disposed of her remains in Matanuska Lake. Shortly after, he started using her debit card, which alerted authorities right away. He would disguise himself while withdrawing the money, but one ATM security camera caught him driving away in a white Ford Focus, and it was because of this that he would soon be caught. On March 13, 2012, a Texas state trooper located the car in question and started following him until he was speeding, at which point he pulled him over. Inside the car was Israel, and authorities then found Samantha's debit card and cell phone. Once arrested, Israel confessed to Samantha's murder, but he also confessed to much more. He claimed to have started killing people in 1998, and by the time he kidnapped Samantha, he claimed to have also killed 10 other people in multiple states. While incarcerated, Israel took his life by attempted strangulation and using a razor blade. Before he died, he drew 11 skulls in his own blood and wrote, quote, "We are one," end quote.
This woman poured boiling sugar all over her husband's body, and this case is absolutely mind-blowing. This case takes place in England on July 14th, 2020. Karina Smith was a 59-year-old woman and was married to an 81-year-old man named Michael Baines. I tried to find pictures of Michael, but I think none are available on the internet. Michael was in need of care due to his poor health, and because of their difference in age, Karina was able to become his primary caregiver. The two had a child together named Michael Jr., and Karina had another son and daughter from a previous relationship. But in 2007, her son Craig took his own life at just the age of 25. Before his death, he went to prison for attacking a man. Following this, Craig became distressed and spoke to his mother. He said the man he attacked was a predator, and that a predator had touched him inappropriately in the past. He said, "Mom, he's a predator." Shortly after this, Craig took his own life. Karina had formed a relationship with Michael while he was in his 40s and her in her 20s. She said the relationship was positive at first, but that was until his age began to become more noticeable, and things started to deteriorate as he aged. But despite this, she still provided Michael with the care he needed. On the 13th of July 2020, people who knew Karina said she had been acting differently and was described as angry and very upset. This was because her daughter had opened up about some horrific trauma both she and her now deceased brother had experienced at the hands of their stepfather, Michael. Karina's daughter told her that when they were younger, Michael would take advantage of them both and would touch them inappropriately. After Karina heard these allegations from her daughter, she remembered what her son told her about being attacked by a predator. The guilt of Craig's suffering from such a fate stayed with her for years, and a deep rage began to burn inside of her. On July 14th, 2020, at around 10 a.m., Karina returned to her home that she shared with Michael. She entered the home and grabbed a bucket, along with 3 kilograms of sugar that she had just bought. She then began to boil a large amount of water, creating a boiling syrup. Once this concoction was ready and scalding hot, Karina slowly entered Michael's bedroom. Michael was fast asleep and totally unaware that his wife was standing over him holding a bucket filled with boiling sugar. Filled with rage, Karina began to pour the boiling sugar all over her sleeping husband's body. Michael woke up and began to scream as the liquid destroyed his skin. This mixture of sugar and boiling water is often referred to as prison napalm, due to the horrific burns it can cause. Once the bucket was empty, Karina ran over to her neighbor's house, which was 9 doors down. She banged on the door until the neighbor answered. Karina didn't know her well, but told her what she had done. The neighbor called the police and explained what happened, and when the police arrived, they entered the home and found Michael whimpering in bed with skin on his arms and torso beginning to peel off. Michael was rushed to the hospital and Karina was arrested. Karina was then asked why she did this to her husband, in which she explained what her daughter told her, and that she became so enraged that she poured the liquid all over her husband. Michael was able to be stabilized but suffered burns to 36% of his body, and 2 weeks later, Michael passed away from his injuries. Karina was then charged with murder and was then found guilty of murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 12 years. Cases like this always cause division. To some, Karina was a hero and someone who took revenge to protect her children, while others see her as a reckless murderer who killed her husband based off one simple allegation. So let me know your opinion on this crazy case.
Terrifying case will teach you to always check if you've locked your front door. This is the horrific case of the Alday family massacre. It was the 14th of May 1974, and for the Alday family living in Georgia, it started as any other. The family consisted of Ned, aged 62, Aubrey, aged 58, Jimmy, 24, Mary, 25, Chester, 30, and Jerry, aged 34. That morning, the same as any other, the men got to work early on the farm and Mary went off to work. Jerry's mum started making the men some lunch around lunchtime, and they came at around midday, ate the food, and then went back to the field, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. Now, a little bit of a backstory now for context of what happened next. A teenager named Carl Isaacs had been in trouble for most of his early life. He'd been in and out of foster care and been in trouble with the law. He was arrested in 1973 for theft and was put in prison. Now, he had an awful time in prison initially. He was actually SA'd by a group of inmates for 8 hours. So he ended up getting transferred to a prison in Maryland where his half-brother actually already was. His half-brother was called Wayne, and when the pair were reunited, they started plotting a prison escape. They also decided to include their friend George Dungy, aged 36, who was in prison for a minor non-violent crime. On the 5th of May, all 3 of the men, under the cover of darkness in the middle of the night, decided to sneak out of the bathroom window. They laid low in a nearby forest, and the prison decided not to inform police as they were probably quite embarrassed. It made them look really bad, obviously. And also they deemed these men as non-violent criminals and didn't think that the public were in any danger. Now, they couldn't have been more wrong. The trio started by stealing a car to get around and ended up going and picking up Carl's brother, Billy, who was only 15 at the time. The 4 males then decided to all go on the run together. They headed south where they planned to rob someone because they didn't have any money or food. They broke into a home but were actually disturbed by the neighbor, which was 19-year-old Richard Miller. Instead of fleeing, the men kidnapped Richard and drove him to a wooded area. There, they executed him and dumped his body. On the 14th of May, they were once again looking for a house to burgle. They spotted Jerry and Mary's trailer in a secluded location and decided to check the locks. The trailer was open. Billy and George kept a lookout while the other two went inside. At this point, Ned and Jerry, having no clue what was going on, pulled up to the trailer. The men then held them at gunpoint and forced them inside. They shot them both, but brave Ned wasn't actually killed by that gunshot and stood up and fought for his life. Carl then shot him 5 more times. Then another family member showed up to the trailer. They were obviously unaware of the horrors unfolding. It was Jerry's brother, Jimmy, and he was again led into the trailer and executed. The murderers were about to flee when Mary then pulled up in her car. Again, they overpowered her and forced her inside. 3 of her family members lay inside the trailer deceased. Now, she was forced to wait inside while the men then heard more family members pull up. Jerry's brother Chester and Uncle Aubrey were next. They parked outside the mobile home and were then ambushed by the gun-wielding criminals. In front of terrified Mary, Wayne shot Chester, and then Carl took Aubrey into the room where his nephew lay dead. He then shot him too. Now, Mary was kept alive, and she was reportedly hysterical, as you would be. The men had a sick plan for her. 2 of the men SA'd her in the trailer where her family members lay dead. Then they drove the terrified woman miles away before stopping and essaying her again. They then took photos of her and then killed her. They fled in the stolen car. Mary's body was discovered 2 days later and the hunt was on. The men in the car were discovered in West Virginia just 2 days after that. It's reported that Wayne laughed when he was confronted about the murders. The men then admitted to killing Richard Miller as well. Horrifically, it was all too much for Mary's poor mum. After hearing what her daughter had gone through, her body started to shut down and she died just 5 days after her daughter had. Carl, Wayne and George were sentenced to the death penalty. Billy cooperated and he was very young at the time of the killings, so he got just 20 years behind bars. The death sentences, though, were then overturned on a technicality. The men were retried. George and Wayne got life in prison and Carl was again sentenced to death. Billy was actually released in 1993 and passed away in 2009. George died of a heart attack in prison in 2006. Carl was executed by lethal injection in 2003 and had been the longest serving death row inmate in the US.
Thought you knew me last week, you don't know me this week, because so many decisions have been made and my life is completely transformed. And yes, you can transform your whole...
The woman you just saw in that video, April Lynn Holt, was murdered in July of 2023. But for over a year, the police in Nashville claimed it was a suicide, and they ignored the cries of help from the victim's family members who knew that this was a murder. In the first part of this series, I explained what exactly happened on that day. According to Donovan, April's husband, who has now been arrested, on that day, April went into the bathroom in their apartment. He didn't check on her for a while, and later on, he sent his young son into the bathroom where he found his mother's unresponsive body. Now, immediately, there were so many red flags here, and my wife and I, who have been following this story and working with the victim's family to bring this series to you, have gotten access to some documents that will show you extreme police failures in this case, lies, deceit, and what I'm about to show you, I think will make you very angry. So, like I said before, the police claim that this was a suicide, and they refuse to look at this as a homicide. So let's take a look right here at the Office of the Medical Examiner's report talking about the death of April Lynn Holt. I'm going to read you right now the official summary of this case from this document. The decedent is a 29-year-old female who was discovered unresponsive in her home by family on July 29, 2023. The decedent reportedly had a bag secured around her head at the time of discovery that was cut off by her spouse. She was transported to Southern Hills Medical Center where she was diagnosed with an anoxic brain injury. Her condition continued to decline and brain death was pronounced on July 31, 2023. The decedent had a reported past medical history of alcohol and marijuana abuse. Her mental health history is unknown and it is not known if she had any prior suicidal attempts, threats, or ideations. Of note, the decedent was reportedly the victim of a sexual assault recently. She was also going through a divorce per investigative reports. Law enforcement was not suspicious of foul play. So there are immediately a few things wrong with that. So Jamie, April's mother, who we've been working with throughout this whole thing, knows the truth about her daughter, and her daughter did not have substance abuse problems. This was something that was completely fabricated by Donovan, April's husband at the time of her death, who's been accused of her murder. And it seems like the police in this case were overly eager to listen to Donovan's every word and accept them as truth, even after his own wife was found dead in his bathroom with a bag wrapped around her head, and his own son reported hearing him and his wife arguing before this happened. Now, if we actually look at the toxicology reports, April, at the time of her death, had nothing in her system. She had no alcohol in her system. She had no recreational drugs. She did have medication that was taken for seizures and epilepsy, but that's about it. But Donovan told the police officers that she had this substance abuse problem, and Detective Timothy Skopek actually paid a visit to the medical examiner and for some reason told the medical examiner about this supposed alcohol and drug use problem, and it made its way onto the official report like I just showed you. But this was a falsehood. Why was the detective inserting this information into this official report that wasn't true, that had no merit? There was no proof, there's no documented rehabilitation stays, nothing like that. But this is only going to get more and more convoluted. So as you can see from this original report, April's cause of death was complications of suffocation. The manner of death was suicide. And circumstances of death were decedent secured bag around head. But just recently, this autopsy report was amended. As you can see here on this fixed report, they didn't even bother to generate a new report. They just crossed things out and added new wording. The complications of suffocation became strangulation. The manner of death went from suicide to homicide. And the circumstances of death went from decedent secured bag around head to decedent was strangled by another person. But why is that? Why did the police finally change this ruling after more than a year? Well, Jamie, April's mother, has fought tirelessly for her daughter and for justice. Jamie, like I mentioned in the last TikTok, has been sending messages and emails and handwritten letters to all sorts of people in the government officials in Tennessee and federal officials, but no one listened. Finally though, earlier this year, Jamie got Donovan, April's husband at the time of her death, who's now been accused of murdering her, on the phone. And on that phone call, Jamie got Donovan to confess to strangling his wife, April, Jamie's daughter. Now, according to Jamie, when she finally got Donovan on the phone to ask him questions, he would only talk to her on a FaceTime type situation where he could see who was in the room, who was listening in, but Jamie recorded the call with an iPhone set up behind her computer. And on this phone call, Donovan admitted that he had killed April, but his story was that he killed her by accident. According to Donovan's story, on that morning that she died, he and April were having violent, freaky sex, and he was choking her, and he ended up choking her to death in the middle of this sexual act. He then freaked out, tried to stage the thing as a suicide, and called the police. But there are so many things, objectively, that I see that are personally wrong with that story. In these reports, it's shown that April Holt was attacked and sexually assaulted by someone that wasn't Donovan just 2 days before she was found dead. In my wife and I's opinion, someone wouldn't be engaging in hardcore intercourse just days after they were violated by another man. In addition, let's look at these documents that were generated by the Nashville Police Department that Jamie, April's mother, gave us access to. Jamie has discussed these documents and their findings at length on her TikTok profile already. We're just reporting on some facts here, trying to get these charges upgraded to what they really should be. So it should be noted here that what you're about to hear and see are writings from a detective who was analyzing evidence found at the scene of April's death. Now keep in mind, this wasn't treated as a crime scene because it was labeled a suicide. And as you'll see in what I'm about to show you, the officers have tried to do everything in their power to stop this from turning into a murder, especially one detective. But let's take a look. So here the detective writes in his document, I reviewed the photographs of the crime scene. The crime scene photos gave a good depiction of what I read in the reports that were available. I noted there were 3 journals that appeared to have been written by the victim, aka April. They were mentioned in the report as well. CSI Ward photographed them and their contents. I attempted to read through them. So what I'm about to show you, this comes from these official reports. These are the final journal entries of April Lynn Holt, some of which was written on the morning that she was killed. April's children reported to the police that the morning that April died, she was in an upbeat, happy mood. She was going to go meet her mother, Jamie, at church that morning. And one of their last memories of their mother is seeing April sitting down in the apartment, drinking some coffee and writing in her journal. Here's the wording from the reports. The book laying on the couch, which refers to April's journal, was open to a page that read, I'm that bitch, human beings. Also in the journal were the words, Like WTF, I see it now. You was never here for this vow, so now it's ciao. Fuck you. So it's a known fact that April and Donovan were going through a divorce at the time that this all happened, and they had been back and forth like this for years, but this was definitely the most serious that April had ever been about finally separating from Donovan, which is something the authorities seem to never have considered in this case. But right here in this journal entry, I interpret this as April finally realizing that she was upset with this marriage and how it was handled. In fact, Donovan, within the first year of the couple's marriage, was already cheating on April. And by the end, when April died, Donovan was cheating on April and April had been cheating on Donovan. So it was a toxic situation. But in these journals, April continues writing. She says, like WTF, I'm paying all the bills, sending you money, and you have the audacity to pay for another bitch lunch with my money. Man, fuck you. I've settled enough. I need a man, not a fan. There should be a bond. Again, N-word, suing women. We aren't your admin. We don't work for you. Shit, I should sue for my wasted time. I know I'm in my prime. And you fucked up. It was never fully mine. Now, these diary entries are very telling, but they continue. The detective writing this report then writes, the book continues with single points that may or not be words to a song. It speaks of the need for rest and to be alone, but also talks of being a mom and having a lot of responsibility. Now, another quote from the diary, life doesn't stop because this experience happened. I have to be strong. I have to be here for everybody else. Assumedly, April is referring to the sexual assault that she suffered just days before her death. In fact, the detective notes this in the report, and he quotes the diary again. April had written, I'm embarrassed, I feel ashamed, I don't want people to know or asking or judging or getting involved. I just want to be alone and act like it didn't happen. I know I'm supposed to go to the ER and put in a police report. Now this is interesting. Courtney, my wife, and I have grown close with Jamie, Jeremiah, and April's entire family at this point. And April, according to them, and this has been documented, actually did go in to seek medical care and wanted this sexual assault to be reported in its own way. But according to them, the wait lines were incredibly long. But after those long waits, April was told that she would have to go to another location to report and be examined. And so she gave up on the whole thing and went home. But back to this report. Another page is labeled The Day After and starts out with a quote from April, I feel so ashamed, dirty, hurting physically. I know it's not my fault. And the detective continues, the writings continue and seem to change paths again, saying things like, we're not making love no more, but I still love you. I still pray for you. You helped me grow. You taught me. You made me a mom. So objectively, we can assume that in that diary entry, April is referring to Donovan. Hence the phrase, you taught me, you made me a mom, you helped me grow. I don't know who else would make April a mother other than Donovan, the father of her child. But it's also got something really interesting in that entry, which once again was written shortly before she died. There's the phrase, we're not making love no more, but I still love you. So make this make sense to me. So according to the story that is being presented right now, Donovan and April were having that wild, freaky, violent sex, which led to her death. But not only did April write down in her journal shortly before she died, we're not making love no more, but she was also sexually assaulted just a few days prior. So does it make sense to you that they would be making love and having sex in a violent, brutal sense, brutal enough sex that April would die from it? With all these circumstances and evidence? I mean, it makes no sense to me. All parties are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, but April's journals themselves contain a lot of wild evidence, so let's continue looking. As you can see here in this document, Jamie, April's mother, you're going to see her writing throughout these documents. That is her with the orange pen. She wrote that these were some of her most recent entries. April wrote, woke up a year older and excited to watch my life come together. Asked God to be in her life, especially my mental health. Overwhelmed, give it to God. Can't rely on Donovan. Asks God to provide her $1,500 for rent. Doing better than I ever had. I look and feel great. I am separated from my husband. It's a great day. Take back control of my life. God, you have woven my life together so perfectly. God, what are you doing for me? I was reported for the 3rd time yesterday. I am scared. How am I supposed to make money to provide? I need clarity. So, in all of these journal entries, April seems to be ready for divorce. She seems to be confident. She's already mentally moved on from Donovan. She's ready to become this mother, this independent woman, a powerful woman. If you read through her journals, she's constantly affirming herself and providing herself with positive encouragement and wording. And yeah, none of this still seems to feed into the story that is being presented right now, that this was some freak accident during freaky sex. Now, this is just my opinion and my wife's opinion. We're not accusing anybody of anything. We're just presenting these facts to you guys. And if you agree with us that this seems to have been more than a situation like that, you can sign the petition that's linked in my TikTok biography. This is incredibly important to us. So please, if you could share this petition, get the word out about this. This is going to be a long and thorough series. So I hope you guys tune back in for the second part, because we're going to get into the police investigation, how corrupt the whole thing was, character witnesses, other evidence, and just really bizarre things that don't make sense, because there are still a lot of bombshells in this story. And at this very moment, the charges that have been levied against Donovan, April's husband, would only really give him a maximum sentence of 12 years in prison. He's essentially being charged with an accidental homicide and not a second-degree murder. And they're once again believing his story, even though the first time it was proven that he lied to investigators, to family members. He said that his wife killed herself when he admitted to strangling her. So why are we believing the second story now? Yeah, I'm going to continue this series in part 3. I know these are very long videos. Thank you for watching. And yeah, part 3, we're going to continue taking a deeper look. And by the end of this, I think you're just going to be shocked. I certainly am. Even now, after studying this and working with the family, it still gets me pissed.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
What are some of the craziest things people have confessed to at the end of their lives? Well, in this series, I've been sharing some of the wildest ones I've found. And if you'd like a full episode on this, I did one on the podcast. So this one comes from a Reddit user who said that right before their grandmother passed away at 98 years old, she confessed to her family that they were actually her second family. But it gets worse. It turned out that previously she had been married to an abusive man and had 2 kids with him. But one night she came home and she just had enough. She took the kids, she shot her husband, and she burned the whole house down. But she left her 2 kids at an orphanage and ran off to start a new life. This came as a total surprise to her family. She said that she had always wished she was able to find the 2 children and explain to them what had happened. But tragically, she passed away a few days later.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew. This video shows the last living polio survivor from the 1950s, Paul Alexander. He still uses his iron lung all day, every day. There are spiders that capture bats and large birds and eat their living bodies. Llama spit is actually projectile vomit. You never stop seeing. When your eyes are closed, you're actually just looking at your eyelids. And now, your eyes are closed. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. Being the second most fragile organ in your body, a single punch can completely rupture your liver. A study conducted over several years found that the TSA failed to catch 95% of guns, drugs, and other illegal paraphernalia going through airports. Selfies that were taken seconds before death, Part 2. Businessman Gia Lajuna attempted to take a selfie with a 1.5-ton walrus at a zoo in China. After climbing into the enclosure, the walrus grabbed him from behind, dragged him underneath the water, drowning him in a matter of minutes. Chinese daredevil Wu Yongjing was an Instagram celebrity best known for taking selfies on top of skyscrapers. While trying to take a selfie on top of a skyscraper in 2017, he lost his grip, falling 62 stories to his death. In 2014, during Spain's annual Running of the Bulls event, 32-year-old David Gonzalez decided to stop and take a selfie in front of 2 bulls that were colliding behind him. All of a sudden, a third bull that he didn't see came from his side and gored him to death.
Okay, let's talk about the details because I know you're all dying to know. In 2014, 22-year-old Marissa Mowry arred an 11-year-old boy and got pregnant with his child. Prosecutors said that Marissa took advantage of the boy 15 times over several months before getting pregnant. When the child was born, the mother of the victim believed that the baby belonged to Marissa's boyfriend, but that wasn't the case. Around 3 years later, the boy, who is now around 15 years old, tells his mother what really happened. They were obviously in disbelief, so they did a DNA test, and it did turn out that he was the father of this child. 5 years later, Marissa is now 28 years old. She was arrested and was facing life in prison, but she took a plea deal and is now only serving 20 years. And what's gross is that Marissa tried to claim that the boy forced himself on her. But after a phone call that she had with the boy that police were recording revealed that she was lying.
So another body has been found in Lady Bird Lake. This is now the fourth man aged 30 to 40 pulled from the lake this year. And many people are claiming they can see patterns in the men being found in the lake, causing people to wonder if it's a serial killer. I just did a podcast episode breaking this all down, but here's some of what we know. So in 2018, these men were 3 of the 6 bodies recovered from bodies of water in downtown Austin. The police ruled that there was no foul play, but all 3 men were seen in the 2 popular bar areas in Austin, 6th Street and Rainey. And in an article from 2019, ER doctors were saying that they were seeing a lot of people coming in after being drugged in these 2 neighborhoods. And as of now, we know that 3 of the 4 men who died in Lady Bird Lake this year were seen in those 2 neighborhoods the night before. The other one is still inconclusive. If you have any information, you can contact the Austin Police Department, and if you know anyone in Austin or anyone traveling to Austin, you can let them know what's going on so that everyone can look out for each other.
This podcaster was murdered after being stalked for several months. 33-year-old Zohre and her husband Mohammed were murdered in their own home in Redmond, Washington after 38-year-old Rahman broke in and shot them. Rahman found Zohre on a podcast app called Clubhouse. They befriended each other through a chat group where they talked about job opportunities in the tech industry. This is where Rahman's obsession began, and Zohre began to feel uncomfortable when she started receiving about 100 messages a day. Ramin began showing up at her house several times during the week. He started following her in public, he left gifts in front of her door, and even threatened to burn her house down. Zohre contacted police in December to get a restraining order, but it was difficult for authorities to serve the restraining order to Rahman because they couldn't locate him since he lived in Texas. On the day of the murder, at 1:45 a.m., Rahman broke in through Zohre's window and he first saw Zohre's mother. She was able to run out and go to the neighbor's house and call police. But at that point, it was too late. He gunned down Zohre and her husband Mohammed and then took his own life.
This is why you shouldn't go out exploring at night. Popular urban exploration YouTuber Urbex Hill was out exploring one night for a video near a dark, abandoned tunnel. Everything was going alright until he encountered this. As you can see, 2 things seem to peer out from the corner and stare at him before running away. It's hard to tell what these things are as it's dark, but they appear to be very tall, skinny-looking creatures of some kind. So what do you guys think? Was this 2 strange-looking people in a dark tunnel at night? Or could these have been some sort of creature? Maybe a skinwalker? Let me know in the comments down below.
These are scary games to play in real life, part 5. This is the Dry Bones game, and it involves summoning a demon that will kind of play the game of tag with you. You will need a bathroom with a mirror, some matches, and make sure nobody else is home with you. It also must be 12:01 at night when you start the game, and all electronic devices must be turned off. Make sure all your lights are turned off and then light your match. Now imagine something you want and say, I am aware of your presence. And I welcome you into my home, but not my body. Come now. If your match lasts more than 15 seconds, he is pleased with you. And you may continue. Now go to the largest room in your house. And this next part can take 5 minutes or 5 hours, so you have to be patient. When he is ready, you will hear a very low unearthly moan and a lot of pressure around your body, and at this point, you must go hide. You must also hide quickly and quietly because he is looking for you. You must remain hidden until 3 a.m. and if he finds you before then, he will take you and do whatever he wants to you. But if he doesn't find you by then, you will get whatever your mind imagines. And whatever you wanted will be waiting for you the very next morning.
A 38-year-old teacher has been accused of raping a 12-year-old student, and to make this situation even worse, she's allegedly pregnant with his child. Fifth grade teacher Alyssa McCommon was arrested in September after she was accused of raping a student at her home in 2021. Alyssa, who is married and has 2 tween children of her own, reportedly befriended multiple children through video games before connecting with them on social media. Law enforcement has even accused her of allegedly creating a code word for the children to use so they could indicate they were alone so that she could allegedly send them nude photographs via Snapchat. She was released on a $25,000 bond, but then arrested again after law enforcement says she violated the terms of her bail agreement by allegedly reaching out to a 12-year-old victim on Snapchat. In court, prosecutors played a secretly recorded phone call between the teacher and the alleged 12-year-old father of her baby. In the phone call, she tells her alleged victim that she's pregnant with his child, that she would love and raise the baby, but for him not to tell anyone. She's facing charges of child rape, coercing a witness, and aggravated stalking and harassment, and she's due back in court in November.
This man claims that his grandma texted him from the afterlife. On 29th October of 2022, my maternal grandma passed away after her health rapidly declined due to cancer. She passed away in the living room on her hospital bed, surrounded by my mother and great aunt who had been caring for her. Since she lived in a council house in the UK, our family had to clear the house before returning it to the council. My mother took charge of handling her will, banking matters, and tying up loose ends. As part of this process, she held onto my grandma's phone in case any of her friends contacted us. Although we didn't expect much, as my grandma led a somewhat of a solitary life. On October 31st, my mother had taken a few days off work to sort through some of her mother's belongings in the house. That day, she received a text on my grandma's phone that said, "I have passed on from this life." My mother felt a sinking feeling in her stomach upon reading it. When she told me, I was in disbelief. Things like this always intrigued me, but I never thought I would get to experience this. The phone number didn't belong to anyone in our family, and when we tried calling it, there was no answer or voicemail.
Gypsy Rose Blanchard is getting out of prison. The child abuse victim who had her abusive mother murdered will be paroled on December 28th. Gypsy Rose is famously believed to be a victim of what used to be known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. For her entire life, Gypsy's mom Dee Dee had her and everyone else around her convinced that Gypsy had leukemia, muscular dystrophy, sleep apnea, learning disabilities, fatal allergies, hearing problems, eye problems, you name it, and she had her medically treated for all of these ailments that were fake. Gypsy didn't know how old she was. She used a wheelchair. She ate through a feeding tube, had all of her teeth pulled, and her head was shaved so it looked like she was going through chemotherapy. Gypsy only realized what was going on when she was in her late teens, and she believed the only way out was to kill her mom. Gypsy convinced her secret boyfriend, Nick, to do the deed. She brought a knife, gave it to him, and then hid in the bathroom so she couldn't see or hear the murder happening. Nick stabbed Dee Dee in the back 17 times while she slept, and afterwards, he and Gypsy went to the room next door and had sex. Gypsy pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She will have served 85% of that sentence when she's paroled. Even after all this time, I'm still wondering who the villain and the victim is in the story.
This man killed his entire family when he was younger, and now he's a college professor. On August 4th, 1967, 15-year-old James Gordon Walcott grabbed a .22 long barrel rifle and killed his father, mother, and 17-year-old sister in cold blood. When asked what drove him to pull the trigger, Walcott told the investigators that he hated his family. The teenager claimed he was tired of his mother's loud chewing, his sister's bad accent, and his father's disapproval of Walcott's anti-war views. The 15-year-old felt as though his family was conniving against him to drive him out of his mind. At the end of the 6-month trial, the jury acquitted Walcott by reason of insanity, and he was admitted into Rusk State Hospital on February 2nd, 1968, where he spent 6 years. 2 years after his release from the hospital, James Walcott legally changed his name and vanished. Nearly 40 years later, James Walcott resurfaced as an award-winning professor of psychology. In 1976, after changing his name to James St. James, the teenager went on to earn a PhD in psychology and joined the Millikan University in Illinois. Described as an older hippie by his colleagues, St. James has now been teaching at Millikan for over 30 years and won the college's Teaching Excellence and Leadership Award in 1997. Soon after, Dr. St. James was offered the position of chairman at the Department of Behavioral Sciences. After learning about the professor's dark past, the local officials, including the mayor of Decatur, were calling for his removal, but still the university stood by St. James's side and refused to let him go. To this day, Dr. James St. James remains the chair of Millikan's Behavioral Science Department, and his experimental psychology classes continue to receive positive reactions on social media.
This teenager became concerned for her ex and tried to help him. Little did she know she was about to be brutally killed. Lauren Astley was 18 years old from Wayland, Massachusetts. She began dating Nathaniel Fujita when the pair were in high school together. Nathaniel was a popular football player. The pair were described